Hi there, this is Anne-Marie, the anti-HR HR lady, and in today's video, I'm going to talk a little bit about disabilities and your workplace rights. It's very clear to me that a lot of you do not understand your workplace rights relevant to disabilities and the Americans with Disabilities Act and requirements that employers have to comply with the ADA. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about that. But first, I'm going to tell you a little story because this is recent. So recently, I had an individual contact me for a discovery call. As you know, I do discovery calls. You can book them through my website where I will talk to people about specific HR situations they have. And I use the calls to assess the situations they present and determine whether I think I can help the employee navigate their way out or through the situation with their employer. So this individual contacted me. They work for a well-known corporation, retail company. And I'm going to not disclose, certain identifying information to keep this confidential. But this individual contacted me. They're working for a major retailer. And they explained to me that they had worked at this company for over 10 years. And that they had, in the course of their work for the company, experienced an injury that resulted in a permanent disability, right? So while they were working for the company, they had an injury. They were given, workers' compensation, but nothing more. And it resulted in a permanent injury, right? Disability to this person, not just an injury, but a disability. As a result of the disability, the individual went to their employer, their manager, and asked for certain accommodations, and specifically to not be put in a situation where their existing disability, which was caused at their employer, to not be exacerbated. In other words, there was something that they were being asked to do that would have made their disability worse. And they asked their manager to work with them to not allow them to be exposed to this particular thing so that it would not further harm them. And do you know what the manager did in response? They put the person on a PIP. That's right. They put him on a PIP with the help of human resources. And when this person contacted me, they had been on this PIP for 30 days. So that means at any time the employer might terminate them. I gave this person some advice about next steps, and I also recommended that they take my online course. At the time I'm doing this video, it is unclear to me whether they have done so, and it is very likely that they're probably going to be fired. I also gave them some advice and told them what I thought they should do if they were fired, which would be to contact an attorney because they have multiple claims based on the information they presented to me, right? In this particular case, so far, the person hasn't followed my instructions as far as I can tell, so I don't know how this is going to turn out. They haven't taken the course. They contacted me again about something that they had put together to write to their HR department. What they wrote was not effectively written in the way that I teach people to write and communicate with HR. And so I have concerns that this is not going to turn out well for them. And I feel really bad because I feel that the way they've been treated by their employer is horrible. But it's indicative of what employers will do. So even though this employer is literally the reason this person has the disability that they have, when this person asked for reasonable accommodations, the employer's response or through the manager was to put the person on a performance improvement plan and claim that they weren't doing their job well in order to track them for termination. So what is it that you need to understand if you have a disability in your workplace? First of all, you need to understand that there is a law called the Americans with Disabilities Act that exists, and it was passed in 1990, and the purpose of it is to protect employees, or not protect employees, but to protect individuals with disability from discrimination. Because people with disabilities are probably one of the largest group of people who are openly discriminated against in American society, and almost no one ever does anything about it. And if you are a person who is also a member of a marginalized group, like particularly if you are Black and you have a disability, then you've got two things working against you in the workplace. And when I talk about disabilities, I'm not just talking about physical disabilities like loss of hearing or not being able to see or having, difficulty walking because of something or so on. I'm talking about both disabilities that people can see as well as disabilities that you cannot, because the ADA also covers cognitive disabilities, right? Certain mental impairments that they consider under the act. And like some of these things that they consider disabilities, people who have them may not consider them to be disabilities in that way. But it's important for you to know that, for example, if you are neurodivergent or have a neurodifference, or like ADHD, for example, that the act does in fact protect you, right? Because under the ADA, you have a right as an employee to go to your employer and disclose your disability and ask for what is called, quote, reasonable accommodations, unquote, right? And so in this video, what I want to talk about is, a little bit about how this works. I also wrote a blog post that has much more details. I suggest that you read it. It will be linked in the description. Please read it because it will give you more information about what you need to do. But in this video, I want you to know that as an employee, if you have a disability, whether it is a physical disability or whether it is a cognitive difference of some kind, you may be in fact protected under the ADA, and you have a right to exercise those rights. However, there are a couple of things I want to make sure that people understand if they have a disability, how to go about raising it. Okay? Now, if you have a disability, I do not recommend that you disclose it during the recruitment and hiring process. Yes, employers have a right to ask you whether or not you have a disability, and they put it right on the application, many of them. I don't recommend that you say that you have one unless you need those accommodations first day of hire, right? Sometimes you may have a disability where if you go into the workplace based on how it's set up, you may not need any accommodations whatsoever, right? I do not recommend disclosing a disability until you actually need accommodations. Why? Because many employers use that question to not hire people with disabilities. They actually use it and discriminate, which is not the intention of the law, but they do that. So they put that question there under the guise of, we just want to know so we can help you. And then they won't hire you because you disclosed during the hiring process that you had a disability and that you needed reasonable accommodations. It's sort of like, if you know that you're pregnant, you don't tell people during the interview. You should be able to. But the fact of the matter is that people will use that to not hire you. Even though, in fact, it's illegal for them to do it, they will still do it, because how are you going to know that that's why they didn't hire you, right? So my advice is, unless you need it right away, don't disclose it till you actually need it. Once you have been hired and you have gone through any probationary or introductory period that your employer may have, that is when I recommend that you disclose and ask for any accommodations that you need. Why? Because you're the most protected then. And my advice is not about what's good for the employer. It's about what's good for you as an employee. So do not disclose it during the hiring and recruitment process unless you absolutely have to. Don't feel because you asked them that question that you have to answer in the affirmative. I don't recommend that you do it. I recommend that you wait until you actually need the accommodation and try not to disclose even then until you are through any introductory or probationary period, so that they cannot try to fire you, because they will do it. It's sad, but employers are very unscrupulous in the United States and elsewhere. And so you have to take steps to protect yourself. And that means sometimes using just basic common sense and not being like, oh, I have to tell them. No, you don't. Don't do it. So once you are through any probationary period, you've been hired, you need reasonable accommodations in order to perform a certain aspect of your job or your job generally speaking. Here is what I recommend that you do. First and foremost, engage with your primary care physician or your therapist, whichever is most appropriate, and get them to write a letter confirming that you have a disability. They don't even have to disclose what it is, but that you have a disability that requires reasonable accommodations and what the reasonable accommodations are, right? You only need to disclose enough to make sure that the employer knows that it exists and that they under the ADA they are required to accommodate it. You give them just enough information for that. You don't need to give them all your personal information and how many times a day you get depressed and how many times a day you have anxiety attacks. Just enough to get what you need. And you can work with your doctor to write it in such a way that protects enough of your privacy and only discloses what you need to disclose. Okay? The next thing is that you then take what you got from your doctor, you read your employee policy about requesting disability accommodations. If they don't have it, then you write something to HR and set up an appointment to go and sit down with someone in HR to find out what their process is. In a lot of companies, especially larger companies, they are now outsourcing this and sending it to third-party companies to review these kinds of requests and approve them. Because why? They don't want to get sued. So they have a lot of companies are outsourcing. Once somebody puts in a request for disability leave or somebody puts in a request for accommodations and things like that, they route them to a third party. I actually think employers that do that are smarter than the employees that don't, right? So they have a third party vet the request, determine whether it meets the requirements of the law. They approve it. They then advise the employer on what they need to do. Or if the person is asking for leave, they say yes or no whether the person should get the leave. Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, especially smaller businesses like doctors' offices, you'd be surprised. Nonprofits are big offenders in this area. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have personnel that have any damn sense, because any HR person should know that you don't violate the ADA. So a lot of times that's where people run into problems. And even at major corporations. Why? Because they think employees don't know their rights, as in the case that I just mentioned. So it's very important that when you ask for your disability leave or your disability accommodations, that you make it clear that you are asking because you know that you are entitled to request this under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's very important that you say that, because if you just come in and say it like, I'm just asking you to do something for me because it's the right thing to do, some of them will say no. Unless you tell them that they need to do it because company policy and the ADA require it, you may find yourself on a PIP or enduring other retaliation. Even when you say it, they might try it. But if you don't say it, they're almost certainly to try it. And that's what's happening to a lot of people that come to me, is that they go to their employer and they didn't know the right way to ask. They didn't know the right words to say. And now they're on a PIP or dealing with other things. And so we have to work together to let the HR department person know that this person now knows that they have rights under the ADA and that they are in fact violating it. Now, employers are required to make reasonable accommodations. So if the accommodations are deemed to be unreasonable, they may not have to make it. Or in some cases, the employer may determine that the accommodations requested will put such a pressure on their business or whatever that they can't make it. In either case, you as an employee have a right to ask them to pay you to leave. And you have to know how to ask for that. You also have to know how to have asserted your rights under the ADA in the first place. But you have a right to do that. If they can't accommodate you, they don't get to just PIP you and fire you. Because in fact, they're the ones in violation, not you. So it's very important that you understand that there's a process you need to go through. There's a specific way you need to ask for these accommodations, right? And that if they come back and say that they can't make the accommodations, then you have a right to say, well, then we may need to do something else. But a lot of them won't come back and say they can't make the accommodations. What they'll instead do is try to do things to make your life so miserable that you will quit. And if that's what you are experiencing, I highly recommend that you book a discovery call with me and we have a conversation, and or you take my online course where I teach how to ask for an exit from a discriminatory hostile work environment and act with cash and actually get it, right? I teach you how to ask them to pay you to leave if they are in fact violating your workplace rights or discriminating against you because you belong to a protected class. And if you have a disability, you do belong to a protected class. You have a protected characteristic. So it's very important to understand that if your employer is not willing to provide the reasonable accommodations that you request under the ADA, that they don't get to just up and fire you. They don't get to retaliate against you. They don't get to take your job duties away and give it to somebody else. They don't get to go stick you in a little room in the back somewhere. They don't get to do some of the things that employers are doing and just get away with it. But they will do those things if you don't know what your rights are. So I really want you guys to understand that if you have a disability, you have a right to ask for reasonable accommodations, right? And that if your employer engages in any kind of punitive action against you because you asked for them, you have actions and steps that you can take, right? Don't just sit back and take it. And if you are injured on the job, that's a whole other conversation that I can also do a video about workers' compensation. If that is helpful to you, you can drop it in the comments. But employers out here just acting the fool. And they're acting the fool because they know that a lot of you don't know what your rights are. And they are taking advantage left and right. Y'all just don't know how much it hurt my heart when this person contacted me and told me their story of what had happened to them. The fact that their employer caused their injury and disability and now is trying to push them out the door because they asked for reasonable accommodations. It's outrageous, but it's not shocking because this is how a lot of these employers do people. They just don't care. They don't care about you. And if you are not of value and you can no longer help them make money or whatever it is that they want to accomplish, they will kick you right out. They don't care how long you've worked for them. And that's what this person is experiencing, that despite working for this company all this time, that they are happy to just kick them right out the door, all because they asked for a reasonable accommodation, a very reasonable accommodation, right? So please make sure that you read the blog post that I wrote. It gives more information about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And please make sure that if your company has a policy about disability leave and any kind of leave that you can take due to disability, that you know what it is. It also make sure you also read anything that they say about reasonable accommodations. A lot of times they don't make it really clear about reasonable accommodations because they don't really want you to know that they have to make them. They wait for you to ask, and then they deal with it on an individual basis, or they route you to a third party, right? One of the reasons why you see all these people in offices now with standing desks is because of the ADA. It's not because employers are nice and they wanted to give them a standing desk. They did it because they don't want to get in trouble with not giving someone an accommodation when someone says sitting at a desk all day is a problem for them. They need a standing desk. That's why a lot of employers have given people standing desks. So that's just one example of employers giving accommodations in the workplace. But there are lots of other ones, right? Some of the reasons why a lot of companies now have bathrooms that are set up to accommodate people with physical disabilities and wheelchairs, for example, is because of the ADA. They do nothing out of the kindness of their heart. They only do things if there's a law that requires it. And it's really important for employees to understand that. So when they are trying now, the Republicans, to roll back these laws and to take these rights away from you, it's because they don't want you to even have a decent workplace to work in. And so those of you who are voters in the U.S. need to be paying attention to what is going on relevant to the National Labor Relations Board. You can Google some of these things. But the Republicans are on a campaign to put you guys back to pre-union days when workers didn't have any rights. That's what they're on the way to, right? And so people really need to be paying attention and making decisions in terms of who they vote for and who they don't vote for. I can't tell you who to vote for and who not to vote for, but it don't make a whole lot of sense to be voting for people who don't want you to have any workplace rights. I'm just saying, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. But it's really an issue that people need to be paying attention to because these laws exist to protect employees. And even though it seems sometimes like you have a lot of rights, you really don't. There are a handful of laws on the books that protect employees. Anything that's not a law, they don't have to do. That's why I talk all the time about bullying and some of these other things that employers do. It's not illegal unless they're doing it in a discriminatory way. That means they're targeting someone based on their protected characteristics. And so employers engage in a lot of bad behavior because they can. So these small workplace rights that you have, it's important for you to know what they are, and it's important for you to know how to assert those rights, because if you don't, they are going to take advantage of you. They will fire you if they can get away with it just because you raised your concerns about your workplace rights. So it's very important, especially relevant to disabilities, Because as I said, people with disabilities are people who are usually are the most underemployed, right? People with physical disabilities, underemployed. They usually, if they are employed, they get paid less. There's just all kinds of violations and discrimination that happens against people with disabilities. And then if you also belong to a marginalized group or racial or ethnic minority, it's a double whammy for you, especially if you're Black. It's a triple whammy for you. And don't be a Black woman and then have a disability. That's like, what, a quadruple whammy? So I want you guys to know that this law exists, that you have rights under this law if you have any type of disability, whether it's physical or cognitive, and that they are things that you can do if your employer is violating any of your rights that fall underneath this law. I hope that this is helpful. Please do read the blog post. If you're not subscribed to my website, please do subscribe. Also, if you find this video helpful, please share it with a friend. Please like, please comment, please subscribe to this channel. It helps me keep these things going and continue to do the work that I'm doing. So please do that as well. But please, please, please read the blog post, because I know that this is an area that a lot of people don't know, that they actually have rights that they can exercise. This is Anne-Marie, the anti-HR lady. As always, HR is not your enemy, but they're definitely not your friend. But I am. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.